citizens of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous, but no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move. This picture tells how the mass migration was accomplished. Neither the Army nor the War Relocation Authority relished the idea of taking men, women, and children from their homes, their shops, and their farms. So the military and civilian agencies alike determined to do the job as a democracy should, with real consideration for the people involved. First attention was given to the problems of sabotage and espionage.
All right, so just to see what's going on, there was not really TV back in the 1940s. The way people would get their news is they would go towards a movie theater. And before the movie started, they'd have like a newsreel. That's where the expression came from. This was a piece of U.S. government propaganda that was shown at movie houses throughout the country.
Here at San Francisco, for example, convoys were being made up within sight of possible Axis agents. There were more Japanese in Los Angeles than in any other area. At nearby San Pedro, houses and hotels occupied almost exclusively by Japanese were within a stone's throw of a naval air base, shipyards, oil wells.
And the fear that they're suggesting is that because there was such a high concentration of Japanese people living near the coast, that they may engage in acts of sabotage, sabotaging the railroads, the naval bases, the oil refineries, etc. So this is the sort of fear that the video is trying to gin up.
Japanese fishermen had every opportunity to watch the movement of our ships. Japanese farmers were living close to vital aircraft plants. So as a first step, all Japanese were required to move from critical areas such as these. But of course this left...
And so that's the
uncertainty of what would happen among these people in case of a Japanese invasion still remained. That is why the commanding general of the Western Defense Command determined that all Japanese within the coastal areas should move inland.
That was General DeWitt, by the way. He was referenced in the reading.
Immediately the Army began mapping evacuation areas and for a time encouraged the Japanese to leave voluntarily. The trouble for the voluntary evacuees soon threatened in their new locations. So the program...
And see that poster there says notice? Here, let me show it to you zoomed in. These posters were actually posted throughout the Western United States. And I'll read it. It's hard to read. It says, instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry living in the following areas. Pursuant to Exclusion Order number 96 on May 23rd, all persons of Japanese ancestry will be evacuated to the above area by 12 noon. The following instructions must be observed. You must basically bring your own bedding, toiletries, clothing, essentials. You have to pack all of your own goods. And you have to go to these locations by these dates. And as we'll learn in the reading, the failure to report to these locations and these dates was itself a crime. So it's basically a catch-22. If you didn't go to these places, you were committing a crime. And by going to these places, you would then be forcibly relocated to these camps where you were detained. So the government was simultaneously excluding you from your home and saying you can't enter your home. So the only place you could go were the camps. Everyone just get the process here. So that's the poster that was being held up on the video.
Put on a planned and protected basis. Thereafter, the American citizen Japanese and Japanese aliens made plans in accordance with orders. Notices were posted. All persons of Japanese descent were required to register. They gathered in their own churches and schools, and the Japanese themselves cheerfully handled the
I don't think it was so cheerful, but
enormous paperwork involved in the migration. Civilian physicians made preliminary medical examinations. Government agencies helped in 100 ways. They helped the evacuees find tenants for their farm.
Right, so what happened if you were a business owner or you were a property owner and you're being excluded from these states? basically the government forced you to hand over your title to your property, which was then either sold or given away. A lot of these businesses were just taken over.
They help businessmen lease, sell, or store their property.
And sold at a very small price, very fraction of whatever they were worth.
This aid was financed by the government, but quick disposal of property often involved financial sacrifice for the evacuees.
Yeah, it's remarkable how candid they are. They even say, yes, it was financial sacrifice. They acknowledge that the quick sale resulted in lower prices. Actually, every year I play this video, and it's like, wow, they were being really honest with what they were doing. Like they were sugarcoating, to be sure, right? But they were actually giving a fairly thorough summary of what was going on.
Now the actual migration got underway.
Migration, yeah.
The Army provided fleets of vans to transport household belongings, and buses to move the people to assembly centers. The evacuees cooperated wholeheartedly. The many loyal among them felt that this was a sacrifice they could make in behalf of America's war effort. Small towns as well as large, up and down the coast, the moving continued. Behind them, they left shops and homes they had occupied for many years.
So you see all their businesses got boarded up. So he says, warning federal government property, no trespassing. Effectively, the government just assumed control over their businesses.
Their fishing fleets were impounded and left under guard. Now they were taken to racetracks and fairgrounds where the Army almost overnight had built assembly centers. They lived here until new pioneer communities could be completed on federally owned lands in the interior. Santa Anita Racetrack, for example, suddenly became a community of about 17,000 persons. The Army provided housing and plenty of healthful, nourishing food for all. The residents of the new...
So how it worked was initially, when they were excluded, they didn't have anywhere to go. So they literally put them like on racetracks and campgrounds. But that was a temporary evacuation facility until the more permanent camps were established.
Community set about developing a way of life as nearly normal as possible. They held church services, Protestant, Catholic, and Buddhist. They issued their own newspaper, organized nursery schools, and some made camouflage nets for the United States Army.
They were basically put to work to help the military build stuff.
Meanwhile, in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and elsewhere, quarters were being built where they would have an opportunity to work and more space in which to live. When word came that these new homes were ready, the final movement began. At each relocation center, evacuees were met by an advance contingent of Japanese who had arrived some days earlier and who now acted as guides. Naturally, the newcomers looked about with some curiosity. They were in a new area, on land that was raw, untamed, but full of opportunity.
Yeah, they were basically in the middle of the desert. The land was raw. They were in the desert. The desert.
Here they would build schools, educate their children, reclaim the desert.
Reclaim the desert.
Their own
That's it.
physicians took precautions to guard against epidemics. They opened advanced Americanization classes for college students, who in turn would instruct other groups. They made a rough beginning at self-government, for while the Army would guard the outer limits of each area, community life and security within were largely up to the Japanese themselves. They immediately saw the need for developing civic leaders. At weekly community meetings, citations were given to the block leaders who had worked most diligently. Special emphasis was put on the health and care of these American children of Japanese descent. citizens, and their grandparents, who are aliens,
And
they wanted to go to work.
It's an important point they just stressed there. For sure, some of the people were not U.S. citizens, but the bulk of the people who were rounded up were U.S. citizens, of Japanese descent to be sure, but they were actually U.S. citizens.
At Manzanar, they built a lath house and began rooting guayuli cuttings. The plants, when mature, will add to our rubber supply. At Parker, they undertook the irrigation of fertile desert lands. Meanwhile, in areas away from the coast and under appropriate safeguards, many were permitted to enter private employment, particularly to work in sugar beet fields where labor was badly needed. Now, this brief picture is actually the prologue to a story that is yet to be told. The full story will begin to unfold when the raw lands of the desert turn green, when all adult hands are at productive work on public lands or in private employment. It will be fully told only when circumstances permit the loyal American citizens once again to enjoy the freedom we in this country cherish, and when the
And so just pause right there. So the loyal citizens can enjoy the freedoms we enjoy. What they're getting at is among those who were held at the camp, there were loyal citizens, but they didn't know who they were. And that this measure was a temporary solution to help weed out the loyal from the disloyal. All right, almost done, I promise.
We hope, have
30
left
seconds
this
more.
country for good. In the meantime, we are setting a standard for the rest of the world in the treatment of people.
Okay, so why are they setting a standard for the rest of the world? They were trying to send a message to the Nazis and the Japanese of how to handle war prisoners. Right? This was propaganda of every sort. But they're saying, look how we're treating our war prisoners. You know, they have schools and they can farm and they can do these other things. Doctors, whatever. What are you guys doing?
People who may have loyalties to an enemy nation. We are protecting ourselves without violating the principles of Christian decency. And we won't change this fundamental decency no matter what our enemies do. But of course, we hope most earnestly that our example will influence the Axis powers in their treatment of Americans who fall into their hands.
Yeah, it's hard to watch, isn't it? I watch it every semester, and every semester I get like, wow, this is tough. But I take the class time to watch it to illustrate a point at how normal this video made it seem. Right? That this video was designed to explain to the American people that, this is no big deal. This is going on. It's for your own good. These people are smiling, they're waving like the cute little kids, right? And don't worry about it. And we can sit here now in the year 2019, 60 years later, 7 years later, and so I was like, oh my God. But this actually happened, and it was largely popular. Forget the Supreme Court. We'll talk about the court in a minute, but this was a policy that was pretty well received at the time. So I'll show some pictures first. Okay, so this is Gordon Hirabayashi, who was involved in the curfew case. That's the first one we'll study in a few minutes. And this is Fred Korematsu, younger, and this is Korematsu later in life. He died in, I think, the early 2000s, if memory serves. I have his tombstone. This is the announcement, which I read to you earlier. There's a video. There's lots of videos. Just go on YouTube. Just click around. It's amazing how many of these propaganda films were released. This is a map of the various places where people were. Here it says assembly center. Right, so that's where they were first assembled near their homes. Then relocation center, those are the triangles. That's where they were relocated. And then the isolation centers is where they were held. Those are the camps themselves. And they were really all over the country, even some facilities here in Texas and elsewhere. I think it says Fort Sam Houston. It's kind of hard to read, I think is what that says. Here's a picture of the front page of the San Francisco newspaper, and in big letters, right? Ouster of all Japs in California near! Exclamation mark, right? It's not like, oh my God, this is happening. It's like, oh my God, this is happening, right? It was. I had a student a couple years ago who, maybe it was his grandparents who lived in California, and they actually told him that they were legitimately concerned about sabotage and espionage, and they actually favored this policy. This one. Does this drawing style look familiar to you? Does this style of art look familiar to you? Yes. Who does it look like? Yeah, Dr. Seuss. So Dr. Seuss, or Theodore Gazelle, as his name was, actually commissioned a number of cartoons for the U.S. government during the war. And this is a cartoon of basically all these Japanese people. Fifth column meant like a group of people who were trying to be spies or trying to bring down their own country, lining up from Washington to Oregon, California, getting boxes of TNT and going online. This is Dr. Seuss. What I'm trying to get at is, the beloved child author was in his spare time drawing these sorts of cartoons in the exact same style as the Cat in the Hat, and the Green Eggs and Ham. Let's see what else I got for you. These are some pictures of the camps. The video they showed was actually pretty glamorous. They're basically dirt floors, right? You're in the wilderness. There were fences. They didn't show those, but they basically had barbed wire fences that they were being kept inside. And here's another photograph of the camps. Here's one of the buses dropping them off, based in the middle of the desert in Utah. Here's another picture, which it's actually funny. This is Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt's wife. She was sent on a PR mission to try to put the camps in a good light. And what was it? Last year, I can't remember what it was, but something last year where the Eleanor Roosevelt Society tweeted something about her, and then I replied with this picture, and then they got really mad at me. I can't remember what it was. What the hell was it? I forgot. Let me look it up because I remember. But I tweeted something about this picture, and someone wasn't happy with me. What was it? Eleanor. That was it. Someone wrote. That was it. Yeah. Someone recently wrote an article saying that Roosevelt was a. That was it. Okay, I'm sorry. I should have looked this up before. I didn't remember until I was teaching this class. But in 2015, the granddaughter of Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt criticized President or then candidate Trump, and they said that their grandmother was a critic of the internment policy. And I basically replied with this picture. That was it. Okay, now I knew what it was. I couldn't remember. And then there was some traffic on that after that happened. Okay. That was it. Okay. I always make trouble for people. This is actually Korematsu and Hirabayashi. I like this picture. It's Korematsu and Rosa Parks together. It's a good picture. I like it. This is a picture from 1990 where Korematsu had a reparations check. It wasn't much. It was maybe a few $100s to compensate them for their loss. President Clinton gave him the Medal of Freedom in 1998. The video's on YouTube. It's actually a good video if you want to watch it. I encourage you. Yeah, he died in 2005, so about 15 years ago. And here's his grave. I guess his wife was still alive at this point. Then this is Matsuya Endo. And I'm not quite sure what she was doing. I think she was basically working as some sort of secretary for the government. I'm not exactly sure. I think that was her function. All right, enough pictures for now. I'll come back to the pictures later. These cases are hard to teach because they don't. How do we put it? What you're reading is very different than what actually occurred. So some basic facts first. The notion that there was this fifth column, that there were all these Japanese fishermen who were watching the movements of boats to try to sabotage military efforts, was simply fiction. It wasn't true. Now, there were spies, right? I don't want to deny that. There were definitely spies. We had our spies in their country, right? They have their spies in our country, right? There's always espionage going on. But the notion that there was this massive infiltration of the entire Japanese American population that warranted this sort of policy is complete fiction. And let me put the point a little bit more bluntly. The Solicitor General of the United States, who's the top lawyer, when he argued before the Supreme Court, his office actively concealed reports suggesting that this problem wasn't real. Right? So the government, as they were defending the internment policy before the Supreme Court, they knew what they were saying wasn't entirely accurate. So when you read Hirabayashi and the court goes on saying, oh, there are all these threats from the Japanese people, right? And you read Korematsu saying, we can't second guess the military, whatever. The military themselves knew that this was not an actual legitimate threat. Now this case takes even more salience in light of the travel ban case decided last year by the Supreme Court. Korematsu was never actually overruled. And last year, just about a year ago now, the Supreme Court decided Trump against Hawaii. And I was in the court that day. I was actually at the court the day it was announced. And at the end of the decision, right at the end of the decision, Chief Justice Roberts was announcing from the bench. And then I'm like, okay, whatever, Trump won. I was like, ready to move on. And then Roberts basically goes, let me get you the exact quote. I was like, whoa, I can't believe you just said that, right? He said, the dissent's reference to Korematsu, however, affords the court the opportunity to make express what is already obvious. Korematsu was gravely wrong the day it was decided and has been overruled in the court of history and, to be clear, has no place in law under the Constitution. And I remember sitting there going, what? Where the hell did that come from, Roberts? First off, how do you overrule a case that's not before you, right? The travel ban case wasn't about Korematsu. In fact, the lawyers didn't even cite Korematsu in their brief. How do you overrule a case? And then what does it mean to overrule a case in the court of history? What is this court of history? Where do we go? Can I be a member of that bar? Can we? What is this court of history? It was a very strange thing. I mean, Westlaw put a red flag on Korematsu that day. My goodness, they were on it, right? Shepherd red, stop sign. What the hell does that mean? All right. Any general questions before we get started? I promise we'll walk through all three of the cases carefully. And we'll do Dames and Moore at the end. We will come back to Dames and Moore, I promise. But we'll walk through all three cases carefully. Any questions before we get started? No? All right, so we have three cases decided in the span of about 2 years. You have Hirabayashi. Hirabayashi concerned the curfew. Right? The curfew basically said you were required to stay in your home during certain hours. But here's the catch. If your home was in the exclusion zone, you couldn't stay in your home. You were screwed, right? The law said you have to stay in your house. But if you stay in your house, you're violating the exclusionary order. So you had a choice, right? You could stay in your house and violate the exclusionary order, or you can leave your house and violate the curfew. You were screwed. You could not comply with both sets of law at the same time. It was a trap. Right? You couldn't. It was impossible. If you stayed home, you were violating the exclusion order, and if you left your home, you're violating the curfew. It's ridiculous. You were unable to actually exist as a human being with those two laws. Your only option was to go to the exclusion centers. Okay, so the first case was Hirabayashi. That was a curfew case. People don't know Hirabayashi. Like, no one even ever hears of it. This was actually a very significant case. Unanimous, too. I know. The second case we have is Korematsu, decided in 1944. This is the case that I think just about everyone knows the name of. Korematsu only concerned the exclusion order, which basically said, let me show you the map again, right? That there were certain regions, here you can see it. See where it says exclusion area? And there's like a dark black line coming like around here. It was basically the entire west coast of the United States. If you were of Japanese descent, you could not exist anywhere in here, right? You had to go somewhere else. Korematsu, though, only concerned exclusion. It did not concern the detention. Now, I want to just pause on that for a moment. Once you're excluded, you have to go somewhere, right? You have to be detained. The bizarre aspect of these three cases is the court said that you can exclude people from their homes in Korematsu, but then in Endo they said, but they can't hold you anywhere. Wait a minute. I will walk you through this one at a time, right? The government can make you leave your home, but they can't bring you anywhere, right? They can force you out of this entire region, but then once you leave, they can't make you go somewhere else. They can't keep you. So it's basically like this bizarre puzzle where you can't exist anywhere. The camps were illegal, but they couldn't exclude you. So where were you supposed to go? I suppose you could just live somewhere in the portion here, but it was a bizarre setup. Okay? Yeah, Sarosh.
That was the thing that I was kind of getting confused with during the case. Like, what if a citizen with Japanese ancestry decided, okay, fine, we'll move to Chicago, and they voluntarily left? Would the government?
I think that'd be a violation of the exclusion order, right? Because the exclusion order says is you have to report to these centers and then be relocated.
So it's forcibly relocated.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it could have happened that before the order went into effect, they left for Chicago. I guess that could have worked, but they didn't have much notice, right? The poster, was dated May 23rd, and you had to report on May 24th. So I mean, you can't get. Yeah, I think you were stuck. I mean, they basically gave you literally May 23rd, May 24th. You had 1 day's notice, and there was no internet. They didn't have advanced notice. It was they literally saw some guy hammering a thing on the pole. All right, so we can get the interplay. Now, no one knows Endo, right? That's probably the most important case of the three, because it's the one where the government actually lost. And where the government said that, where the court said that you can't have these concentration camps, these detention camps. But no one even knows about Endo. All right, everyone with me? All right, Lindsay, so let's walk through these cases one at a time. I'll start with you in Hirabayashi. Walk me through the legal regime, the laws in effect in Hirabayashi, the first case.
So in Hirabayashi, there was an executive order.
Okay, good. So President Roosevelt signs an executive order, okay?
And then in March 1942, March 21st of 1942, Congress passed a statute stating that the citizens had to obey restrictions that were authorized by the military in certain areas.
Okay, very good, Lindsay. Did the statute say what those restrictions were?
No.
All right, so basically, Congress passes a law that says the people must follow whatever regulations the military sets. What did Hirabayashi argue? What was his argument, Lindsay?
He argued that it was unconstitutional.
Why?
Because it violated, I have the 14th Amendment.
Well, it's not 14th. Yes, 5th, but before we get to the Bill of Rights, what's the problem when Congress gives the president the power to basically criminalize anything? What do we call that?
Oh, the non-delegation doctrine?
Excellent, very good. The non-delegation doctrine. Remember Schechter Poultry, the chicken case? Right? Hirabayashi says, wait a minute, this is not a valid statute, right? Congress cannot simply give the president a blank check to enact whatever military crimes he wants without any notice or anything else. Hirabayashi also argues that there's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. Now, we haven't discussed the Fifth Amendment yet. We will later. But there's a provision in there that says you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And Hirabayashi basically argued, you are making me subject to this ban without any process, right? There's no allegation that I'm a traitor. There's no allegation that I'm treasonous, that I'm a sabotager, right? No trial, no hearing, zippo. So therefore, you cannot deprive me of my liberty without this due process of law. All right, everyone get the gist? All right, Chelsea. Of authority. And here the court upheld. They upheld. Basically, Congress giving the president a blank check, because the non-delegation doctrine really had no more teeth. But the court even goes further than this. The court says that reasonable men who are charged with defending us may think this is a reasonable measure, and that's it. We're not going to second guess them. And indeed, the court doubles down and says there's a risk of sabotage, right? There's reports of people in sympathy with the Japanese government. There are all these Japanese people, and they go on this rant, which I was like, what am I reading? It's like, they don't assimilate. You see this one? Right, there's no assimilation. They don't interact with other people. They're very insular. And in fact, the state governments have actually deprived Japanese people the power to own land. They send their students to their own schools. They don't learn English. They're also Japanese dual citizens. There's little social intercourse between the Japanese people and the white population. And every year we're like, why is any of this actually necessary? They already said enough to uphold the thing, right? To uphold the statute, the conviction of Hirabayashi. Why did they go through these lengths to talk about these things? And the best answer that I can come up with is that they believed it, and they thought it was true, and they thought it was just and the right thing. Right? They could have just said, we're not going to second guess the government, and I think that, that would have been, one decision. But then they say, we basically agree that this is a necessary measure to defend us. Okay, so that's the delegation issue, right? Any questions on that part? Any questions? Yeah.
Was Hirabayashi also overruled when Korematsu?
Chief Justice Roberts did not mention Hirabayashi. Still got it. I mean, you can go check Westlaw for me, but I'm pretty sure there's not a red flag there. One of a colleague who teaches at, I think he's at the University of North Carolina, he's an expert on the Japanese detention cases, and he flipped out that Roberts only said that Korematsu was overruled, but not Hirabayashi. Again, Hirabayashi is a precedent that had a very significant effect, and people don't even know it's even called. The name doesn't register.
So when Korematsu was overruled,
I don't think it actually was.
So it's
but
not, okay. So the president would still have.
I mean, let me put it this way: during the George W. Bush administration, the government did not rely on Korematsu. They could have, but they didn't. In my mind, that's a much stronger indication that Korematsu should not be cited than John Roberts' little at the end of the Hawaii case. Yeah.
Is it better to assume that the government basically abandoned its own
authority?
Yeah,
I think that's a good. Yeah, I think that's a good argument. They, in the Guantanamo cases, you'd think they would want to cite their strongest case, and they would not bring this case in. It's the same reason why if you're going to court, you probably are not going to be citing Dred Scott. That's probably not a good idea. There was actually a case last year where there was it was stupid, where a state attorney general actually favorably cited Dred Scott. And the reason why is they were trying to argue that Declaration of Independence is not part of our law. And there's a sentence in Tawney where Tawney says the all people created equal part is not part of our law. So they actually cited that in a brief, and it created such a backlash. They actually withdrew the brief and put the brief back in without that sentence.